Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. I would like to request the staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Next, we'll go into roll call.
Board Member Olson?
Here.
Board Member Miles?
Here.
Board Member Owens?
Here.
Chair Dortzweiler?
Here.
We have a quorum of 4 members.
Next, we'll move on to the minutes of our last meeting. Is there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the May 19th, 2022 regular meeting? If not, is there a motion for approval?
I'd make a motion for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that the minutes of the May 19th, 2022 regular meeting be approved. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business, application V22-6, filed by Jeff Mays on behalf of REPCO.
This is Justin. I'll have to recuse myself from the next 2 items.
So what we will do, Justin, is we'll put you in the Zoom waiting room where you will wait until we're complete with the next 2 agenda items, and then you can rejoin us before we adjourn and get on to our other matters there on our agenda.
All right.
What did I put in waiting? All right, so I'm going to be presenting the staff reports today. Our first item is an application by the applicant Jeff Mace on behalf of REPCO, and I'll pull up the screen so we can see the property that is the subject of our conversation. So REPCO is on East North Street and currently has 2 large buildings and 2 smaller buildings, so 4 buildings total. And what they're looking to do is do an addition that would combine the 2 larger buildings and create 1 single larger unit. So this is an aerial photo that gives you kind of a 3D dimensional view of the site. Here is the same site looking from the east. Here is North Street. And then here is a survey of the property. And what the applicant is wanting to do is construct a new addition that would basically be 3 buildings combined into 1 structure. And in doing so, they're going to increase their required off-street parking, and that's the nature of this particular request, is to talk about the amount of off-street parking that would be appropriate for the proposed REPCO expansion. So the expansion itself, building A contains 29,944 square feet. Building C contains 34,795 square feet, and the proposed addition in the middle, which we will call Building E, will have 39,100 square feet. 13,000 square feet plus is going to be dedicated to new office and lab space, while the remaining 24,945 square feet will be additional storage area for the REPCO operations. And so here we have a floor plan of the new structure once all 3 buildings are combined into 1, and you have the breakdown of the uses. So the yellowish color that you see on the screen or in your packet is the office and lab area. The green areas that you see are storage, and the purplish spaces are their fabrication. And there's a legend on the right side that I'll kind of pull up. And the pinkish reddish area is accessory use area. And so what we're going to do is look at the breakdown of parking. So for different types of zoning classifications, the off-street parking regulations require a number of parking spaces based on their use. And so in this particular use, we have three different, or this type of operation with REPCO, we have three different types of uses. One is our business use, which deals with offices and office spaces, and that requires one off-street parking space for every 300 square feet of office area. Then we also have warehousing or storage space, which requires one off-street parking space for every 2,000 square feet of storage space. And then lastly, we have the manufacturing space. And a number of years ago, the Planning Commission and City Commission amended our manufacturing section to create a sliding scale, recognizing that manufacturing spaces are really difficult to project how many off-street parking spaces are appropriate for them, because each manufacturing operation is different. They have different levels of automation, they have different types of machinery that they use, they have different amounts of manpower that are required for their operations, and not only is it different per manufacturing plant, but manufacturing plants in and of themselves are constantly changing and evolving as they become more automated, machine-driven, and robotic-driven. And so that code was amended to create a sliding scale based on the size of REPCO's manufacturing area. They're required to have one off-street parking space for every 1,000 square feet of manufacturing area. Now, I bring that up because the code, the zoning ordinance, particularly the off-street parking regulations, have a separate variance process than what you typically see as a board. So typically, when we are reviewing variance requests, we're looking at uniqueness of the property, how it's unique from other properties, the impact it might have on the public, the impact it might have on the neighbors, the general spirit and intent of the regulations, and those types of criteria. When we're talking about off-street parking criteria, we just have three criteria, and so those are the ones we will go through. The first is that an adequate number of vacant parking spaces will be available at all times other than peak hours and during peak seasons of use. The second is that traffic circulation in driving aisles will not become congested by motorists searching for a vacant space. And three, the parking cars will not overflow into adjacent areas. And so we'll start by looking at the required off-street parking spaces. So if you were to take this floor plan and put those numbers into a table form, you would come up with a number of required off-street parking spaces. And so the architect has done that work for us, and they've taken the warehouse space, the manufacturing space, and the business space, and they've added up all those areas and then created a chart here, or table that you can look at to break down the amount of off-street parking that's required for each of those uses. And so because of the amount of business area we have, which is a little under 20,000, we are required to have 66 off-street parking spaces for our business area, 14 spaces for our manufacturing area, and 37 spaces for our warehouse and storage area. In total, that comes out to 117 parking spaces that are required. The site plan that the applicant has provided shows 71 off-street parking spaces. And the reason that there's 71 parking spaces is because the applicant believes that based on the number of employees they have, their projected future growth, their required, from a functional standpoint, from a business standpoint, their personal operations requirements for visitors and their ADA parking, they believe that 71 off-street parking spaces is appropriate. So the chart that we have up on the screen here, the table, they have 45 employees, and so at maximum capacity, when all 45 are there at the same time, they would need 45 off-street parking stalls. they've allowed 20 off-street parking stalls for future growth, which is about a 40-some% increase over what they have today. And they have allowed 3 off-street parking spaces for visitors because their operations don't have a lot of visitors coming onto the site, as well as 3 ADA parking spaces. So they feel that the 71 off-street parking spaces is the right amount for them. And so typically when we are looking at a parking variance and we have a difference in which the applicant's operations require less off-street parking spaces than what the code would anticipate, what we typically ask is for the applicant to describe and identify where are those major differences. And so if we were to go back to our requirement table, you'll see that the vast majority of the required off-street parking, I'm going to let some people in here, although I think I have to put Justin back in his waiting room. The vast majority of off-street parking spaces are required for their business space, which is their office space, and their warehouse space. Now, the applicant has shared with us that they have large amounts of storage space based on their business models, and that a lot of those, I'm going to pull up some pictures here, a lot of the space just is that it's storage space, and that they only have a few employees that are dedicated towards managing the warehouse space with some forklifts. So we're going to scroll through some pictures. This is the vast majority of the space that is within the REPCO buildings. And you can see that they have a interior propane type of forklift that is driven, and they also have a training room. So those are the 2 main areas that are generating a lot of the parking for their business area, their office area, as well as their storage area. So in other words, if we look at what is driving the required parking for REPCO, we see that they have a lot of warehouse space and they have a lot of business space, particularly with their conference room. Their conference room gets used about 8 times a year, and the purpose of that conference room is for training. It's a training room in which they'll bring all of their employees in at once, and so that training room has to be sufficiently sized for all of their staff. However, when you have everyone in the room in that training session, you don't have them throughout the rest of the site. So it's really a duplicative space if you were to require parking for the training room as you typically would, while also requiring parking for all the other uses. And so that's one of the elements of the parking that is a little bit unique for this particular REPCO use. The other is the warehouse, where under the code would anticipate that you would need 37 parking spaces for 37 employees to man and operate that size of warehouse space. However, REPCO only has a few. And so those are the main criteria or the main reasons that the applicant has identified as the difference between what the code requires and what the REPCO operations really need. So the second criteria that we look at is access aisles. They must not become congested due to motorists searching or waiting for vacant spaces. And so what we do is we look at the actual parking plan, and the parking plan has sufficient aisle widths. It has sufficient depths and sizes for their off-street parking stalls, and there is a circulation capacity where there shouldn't be any traffic congestion, and there are no shifts with REPCO. There's a single shift per day, so there's not that overlap, or you might have one shift of employees coming in while another is leaving. And additionally, the site doesn't I forgot what I was going to say there. Oh, the majority of the parking is for employees. So the site doesn't have a lot of additional people coming into it like a retail or a restaurant would. So what you have is you have employees reporting to work and pretty much staying there all day until they either leave for lunch or they leave at the end of the day. So there's not a lot of come and go traffic with this particular operation. So there shouldn't be any issues with congestion and traffic movements within the site. The third criteria is overflow on the adjacent public streets. So if you were to look at an aerial photo of the area, you will notice that you have the REPCO site, and then all of the surrounding uses are Great Plains Manufacturing. So you have Great Plains Manufacturing to the west, to the north, as well as to the east, and then you have North Street to the south and some ag land across the street. So they are really what we might call landlocked, in which they don't have a lot of overflow parking options on adjacent properties. However, the site itself has quite a bit of open area still existing. So if you look at the parking lot that's being proposed, you still have over 180 feet between the parking lot and North Street, where you could expand and add additional parking. You also have a lot of space back behind on the north side, where the architect has actually drawn up additional parking stalls, 46 additional parking stalls, showing that in a worst-case scenario, they could still provide for the 117 off-street parking spaces. They just feel that the 117 is overkill for their operations, and they're really wanting to use pavement rather than gravel. So they are zoned industrial, where they're not required to have paved parking, but for the purposes of their use and for their employees, they'd rather have paved parking, but they don't want to go through an unnecessary expense of adding additional paved parking when spots are just going to sit vacant. And so that takes us to our alternatives. So the board could approve the parking variance as requested if the required findings of fact can be made. Number two, the board could approve a lesser variance than requested if the required findings of fact can be made. Number three, the board could postpone action if additional information is needed, or the board could deny the applicant's request if they find that the findings of fact to permit or allow the request cannot be made. So staff would note that if the applicant is able to show how the operations are unique and require fewer employees per square foot compared to what the off-street parking regulations would typically require, we would recommend approval of the requested variance to reduce the number of required parking spaces with the conditions 1 and 2 listed at the bottom of pages 6 and 7. And so in our report, we did ask that the applicant better clarify what makes their operations unique, and staff since then has had conversations with the applicant in which he sent photographs of the training area and the storage space, and noted to us that they don't have a lot of employees using or working within those warehouse storage spaces, and that the training room is used a handful of times a year in which all employees report, and other than that is vacant, and it would be duplicative space when compared to the rest of their operations. So with that, staff would take any questions that the board might have, and the applicant is with us on Zoom now if you'd like to ask him any questions as well.
Are there any questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak?
You're muted, Jeff. You got your mute on still.
I got it. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as always, staff did an excellent job in the report, and Dustin covered a lot of the areas that we've been talking about, and as we've been bantering back and forth with what the right amount would be. I really don't need to belabor the points. As I said, Dustin did a great job in presenting the need for the variance. I would point out, I guess, is that we do, in that 71 number, we are including 20 more stalls than what we feel we even practically would need today. The other thing that as Dustin and I were talking about this, that I would point out to you is, if it's any comfort, which it would be for me if I were sitting on your side of the desk, future growth for this organization and expansions are going to be triggered by building permittable items. So this is a request based on what we're doing and the expansion that we're bringing forth today. When this stops working, if we're going to add or do or change anything, we're going to be back in front of not only staff, but also the governing bodies relative to the building permit. And so there would be another bite of the apple. If things change down the road, we can always, this can be revisited under the next application with building permit. So really what we're saying is today we feel like 71 does excessively even more than what we need, to the tune of 20 stalls for future growth. So with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions that any of the board members may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant from the board? Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak?
I don't see anyone on Zoom unmuting themselves or raising their hand.
Is there a motion to come before the board?
Yeah, I would make a motion to approve application V22-6 filed by Jeff Mays on behalf of REPCO. And the reason for that motion is I would agree with the number of parking spaces that they need, and they have the available space to the south of where that lot is for future growth.
Is there a second for the motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve application V22-6. Just for a point of clarification on your motion, John,
Would be with the recommendation.
with the recommendations of the conditions 1 and 2?
Yep.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve application V22-6 with the staff's recommendations and conditions number 1 and 2. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I appreciate your time and your consideration, and thanks again to staff for all their hard work. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to application V22-7.
All right, while I get that set up here. Okay. Okay. All right, so the next application is by Justin May on behalf of Jason and Tiffany Wells, and they're requesting a height variance of 1 foot from 20 foot, which is the maximum height that a detached garage can be in the RS district, as well as a size variance of 330 square feet from 1,200 square feet, which is the maximum size of a garage you can have in the RS district, to allow a 21-foot tall garage with 1,530 square feet of roof area. So the background of the property is we have a residential property here at 440 Upper Mill Heights Drive. That particular property was platted in 1950 with a 44 by 110 two-story dwelling on the lot constructed in October of 1961. So that lot that you see is a larger lot. It's part of the RS zoning district, and the RS zoning district is designed for lower density, larger estate-style dwellings in which the minimum lot area for properties in the RS district is 1 acre. The subject property has about 1.34 acres. So that kind of gives you the size of the site and what the RS district is. So in addition to having larger lot size requirements. The RS district, because they have larger lots, also allows for garages of up to 1,200 square feet, which is larger than what we typically allow in all other residential districts, which is 770 square feet. And so the applicant approached staff with building permits to construct a new 30 by 35 detached garage in the rear of the property. When staff reviewed it, we noted that there's also a covered porch off to the side, which these squares or dots that you see on the site plan show the post of the roof covering. And as we go through and look at the elevation drawings, it'll become a little clearer what is being proposed. So you have a 30 by 35 foot, 2-story detached garage with a roof that extends another 16 feet by 30 feet out to the side. And so the elevation drawings here, you have your garage that's 2 stories, and there's like a covered porch or patio off to the side of that structure. Now what that porch structure does is it causes the structure to exceed the 1,200 square foot maximum that is allowed by code. And so the staff, when we met with the applicant, presented them with the option of either reducing the total size of the structure, eliminating the covered porch portion of the structure, or applying to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a size variance for the maximum size of the garage, as well as a height variance to allow a 21-foot structure, where a 20-foot structure is the maximum height for detached garages. The applicant chose to submit this variance request to the board for their review. All of the properties in the surrounding area are also RS, which have similar lot sizes. So when we look at the uniqueness of the property, the applicant states that the uniqueness factor criteria is not applicable to the variance request. Staff would note that without a finding of uniqueness, the board has no authority or legal basis to approve a variance, so it is not only applicable, but it is vital and necessary and important that we consider that. Now, as staff was doing the review, we did note that there are a few items that are different or unique with the property. For one, you have a larger lot. It's unusually large. It's 1.34 acres, over 60,000, around 60,000 square feet. It has an unusual topography where, as you go from the Upper Mill Heights Drive area or the east end of the property and you work your way west, you will find that the property elevation changes by about 25 feet. So there's about 25 feet of fall off from east to west with the property. You also have a river at the rear instead of another residential property or some other use, so that is unique. You also have a heavily wooded area back as you get towards the river area, and you have a deep setback. So the house itself is already set back 86 feet from the property line, which typically what you'll find is a 25-foot setback. And so in this case, we're 86 feet back. And then you also have the house structure, the existing attached garage, all in front of the detached garage, which is going to be constructed roughly where my cursor is on the aerial photo. So those are some unique qualities that staff would identify as being elements of the property that are different than what you typically would find in a residential property. In looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that the existing house is a 2-story house, and the roof peak of the existing house is over 21 feet, so it will still be taller than the detached garage, and that the structure itself is open, so the addition on the property, which causes the detached garage to exceed the 1,200 square feet, would be a roof with no sides, just a couple of columns to support the roof, and therefore would not have an impact on the neighbors. And that particular covered porch area would be oriented inwards towards the property where you wouldn't really see it from the street and you wouldn't see it from the neighboring properties. And so staff would agree with all of that, that the main addition of the covered porch would be oriented inwards towards the property. Going to the site plan here. So here's where the extended porch would be. It would be extended inward towards the property where you have the pool in the backyard of the house. There is, however, something of note that could possibly affect the neighbors, and that is the potential water runoff that the site has. And so it appears as though the plans to address the water runoff from all of the additional building area and paving area is to have the water run to the north, create a berm that would be centered on the property line. In other words, would be partially on this property and partially be on the property to the north to dam up the water and create a swale that then would carry the water to the west to the creek. So if you were to look at an aerial photo, what that would look like is it appears as though there's going to be some berming or damming of soil on the property line with a swale where water will be directed to the north. The berm will catch it and the swale will run it to the west to the creek. And so the neighbor of the applicant to the north has expressed concern to staff about that plan and how effective it will be, and also if the berm would be on his property, if it'd be solely on the applicant's property. And so that's something we would speak to the applicant about and ask them to clarify, their plan for how they're going to address stormwater runoff and whether or not they would be using any of the neighbor's property to accommodate that design and those site improvements. Looking at unnecessary hardship, the question for the board is whether the strict application of the maximum garage size limitation, which is 1,200 square feet, would deprive the owner of their ability to have a covered patio. No variance would be required if the applicant chose to have a patio somewhere on the existing dwelling structure because it wouldn't exceed the maximum lot size requirements because you have such a large lot. And so one of the questions is why the detached garage? Why not have the covered porch area on the existing dwelling? And what is the burden and hardship that would be presented if that were the case where the board didn't approve the covered porch on the garage but required it to be on the house? Because the burden is on the applicant to provide that it's not feasible to have a covered porch on the house and that it is necessary to have it on the detached structure. Because if you were to remove the covered porch, then the size of the detached garage would comply with the 1,200 square foot maximum. Next, we look at the effect on the public health, safety, and welfare. And the applicant notes that the variance is on privately owned residential lot, and staff would agree that it is on a privately owned lot. However, construction that takes place on private residential lots can also impact the public health and safety if not properly constructed or located. And this is a special concern of staff's when we talk about the drainage, because there is so much slope on the property and because we are adding so much impervious surface area. We would make sure that the applicant describe how the water runoff will be dealt with in a way that doesn't impact any of the neighboring properties, particularly the property to the north. And the last criteria that we look at is conformity with the general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance. And the applicant states that the two requests are minor deviations from the zoning ordinance. Staff would note that the reason that the zoning ordinance is written in the way that it is, where you have maximum size allowances, is to keep residential properties residential. And even when you have large estate-style lots like we have in the RS zoning district, there's still a limitation to preserve the residential character of the neighborhood and to not have overwhelming structures that dominate the surrounding area and the neighborhood. So staff would disagree, and we would think that the applicant's request to go from 1,200 square feet to 1,530 is an increase of 27%, which isn't minor. It's over a quarter of the size larger than what typically would be allowed. Now, with that being said, the size of the lot is over, an acre and a third, and so would it be proportional in terms of its appearance and size and bulk to the lot? We don't believe that what's being proposed would overwhelm the lot because of the size of the lot, and so the proposed improvements are viewed as being proportionate with the size of the lot. And so staff's comments, having sufficient physical space is not sufficient justification in and of itself for a size variance. When we look at the general spirit and intent, there's a couple of questions that come to mind, and one is the proposed building, will it not be out of scale with the surrounding area? And two, the proposed building will maintain the residential appearance and character of the neighborhood. We feel, given the size of the lot and the size of the structures that are being proposed, that it's possible to construct the proposed detached garage in a way in which it still is compatible and proportional to the overall lot. The question for the board to consider is whether the additional shade structure covered patio area on the detached garage is too much building for the size of the lot and the size of the house and the surrounding neighborhood. So that's the question. The garage itself is 30 by 35. It really becomes the extra 16 feet that are being proposed that causes the question to be asked if this particular structure is too large. So staff has identified some alternatives on page 7. One, the board could approve the requested garage size variance and height variances as requested. If the findings of fact can be made, the board could approve a lesser variance than requested. In other words, potentially you could approve a shade structure that's less than the 16 by 30 that's being proposed, if you feel the requested findings of fact can be made for that. Number 3, the board could approve the requested garage height variance, but deny the requested maximum garage size, which would mean that the garage could be built as proposed, but without the proposed covering of the patio addition. Number 4, you could postpone action if you feel additional information is needed. If you do that, you would need to postpone action to a specific date. And number 5, you could deny the applicant's request that the findings of fact to approve the variance cannot be made. Staff would request that the applicant provide additional information about the uniqueness of this lot, how site runoff, stormwater runoff to the north will be handled, and what the hardship would be if the board were not to approve the covered porch addition and the strict application of the maximum size limitation is enforced. And if the applicant provides that information to the satisfaction of the board and the board wishes to approve the 2 variances, we do have 3 potential conditions of approval that we've listed on the bottom of page 7. So with that, staff will take any questions that the board may have.
Are there any questions for staff?
So you said the existing house is 22 feet tall? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and the plan is for 21 feet?
21 feet for the detached structure, so it'd be nominally the same height.
Okay, and based on the topography, I know that it's significant from the front to the back, but in the area where we're going, is it pretty much on a level, or is that the anticipation, or is it going to be set at a lower level?
I believe it's pretty level because we have a pool in the area. So if you were to look at this site plan, there are some stairs and there's a pool, and these pink lines, I believe, are retaining walls, but that's a fair question and maybe the applicant can kind of clue us in on, because there may be some grade change, but what I understand is that the garage itself will be fairly level to, the base of the garage will be relatively the same elevation as the base of the house. We'll say it that way. That's what I understand it to be, but the applicant can confirm that.
Okay.
Do you know what the purpose within the code is to limiting a structure to 20 foot and not making it in some formula to the actual residence height?
So it's kind of an either-or qualifier on that limitation. So the way it actually reads is, it is a maximum of 20 feet in height or the height of the residential dwelling, whichever is less. So in this case, the 20-foot maximum is required because the house is 22 feet. Now, if the house was 18 feet, even if the maximum allowed could potentially be 20 feet, it would still be 18 feet because you can't be taller than the principal structure. And the reason behind that is so that the accessory structures are not more dominant on the property than the principal structures. So we don't want the accessory structures to dominate the property and have, let's say, a massive garage and then a smaller house. The idea is that the principal structure still is the main structure, both in use and function as well as appearance.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? If not, would the applicant like to speak?
And thanks again, Dustin and staff, for putting that together. Let's see. So questions, you are right, correct. The garage is just a hair lower than the surrounding grade of the house. What other questions?
The other concern or topic we want to talk about was dealing with the stormwater runoff with the additional paving and roofing structure that we're adding and how that will be dealt with to make sure that we're not having any water flow onto neighboring properties.
Let's see. Do you want to go on the covered patio? The reasons for probably adding that, the hardships. It faces towards the south, so we proposed that with that garage addition, we would use that for, cooking, entertaining, shade space, just some additional places to get out of the sun, and usable space. Knowing that it's above and beyond the required square footage, which is why we're here on that variance item. So that's one thing to consider. On the drainage, if you want to go to that sheet 2.
Okay, I think I have the right one pulled up. Let me get it on the screen.
Now that we have some subcontractors talking with the Wells and about their neighbor, we actually do have a better game plan for trying to eliminate as much runoff to this adjacent site. So we met Monday of this week, and we do have a pretty good game plan to almost eliminate any runoff from this new addition to that property. So I could describe that. So before we had inlet boxes kind of running off and then going, do you have a pointer I could use, or?
Do we have a pointer?
Okay.
I have a mouse. I can kind of, I don't know if you can see the cursor.
So, but in the front of the house, so basically the existing drainage ran down that property and went,
Just directly to the west of the river?
yeah. So it fell down in there because, that's the original slope. It had a little raised area on that where the garage sits, and then it's came down already. I do believe he had, probably some potential problems in the past, which this garage obviously doesn't look like it's going to help. But what we propose now is we're going to put an inlet box down at where that new paving slopes in, Dustin. Keep going down a little bit, right there. And so we're going to divert all that rainwater off that and actually go to the south and wrap around and go straight east. So we're going to
West.
west.
Okay.
directly west. So now that we have a plumber involved and we got some more minds involved, we kind of said, hey, let's think a little better about this. So after discussing it with the dirt guy, the plumber, and the contractor, we all agreed that trying to eliminate as much water going to the north as possible is the best for the adjacent property. With that said, looking at the grade, we will eliminate that berm onto the adjacent property, and our flume will help with diverting that, which currently right now they do not have. It just tapers onto the adjacent property. So, because we're going to eliminate basically 90% of the water that was currently on the site before this garage to the south and to the west. The only rainwater that you'll get will be down the drive, which currently would be unchanged, and it'll flow down. So no additional water that's existing is going to be on that property. So we feel that with those revisions, which I will make and show and present to make sure everybody agrees with that, I believe we have a pretty good solution for that fix of the drainage.
Okay. So to reiterate, what I think you're saying is you're still going to have a drainage swale along the north property line that would capture water and direct it directly to the west to the river. However, you won't have berming on that swale, and to reduce the amount of water that goes to the swale, you're going to have an inlet with a guttering system. That guttering system is going to send water into an inlet, and it's going to be piped underground around
Yep.
the structure, and we'll have a fallout point somewhere west on the property.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, to the west of, like back here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go around that retaining wall and kind of daylight out. It'll probably be, we're going to do, we're calculating that right now, but it'll be probably be 3 or 4 different pipes from around the area, just so we're not on one. So we're calculating that right now, so.
Okay.
So, and then the difference between the swell and the berm is what?
So the berm would be built up, so I kind of added that for extra security, so any water wouldn't rush over to the adjacent property, so it kind of just humped up. It's about a 1 foot 4, or a 1 foot, anyway, 1.6 inch berm, just to kind of help that water stay into that swell. So the swell is kind of just a little ditch.
Right, it's going to be concave. So how
Yep.
deep will the swell be?
I think it's about the same thing, about 1.5 feet. Varies from 6 inches to about 1.5 feet, just so it's mowable and not, not so deep.
Okay. And then, but there will still be a berm, but it'll set on this property and not on the adjacent property.
Well, I think the berm, so we just eliminate the berm, so the adjacent land wouldn't be changed.
Okay.
And then when we cross that property line, it'll just dip down and have that swell that goes on, as I show there with the arrows and the grade points.
Gotcha. Okay. So next question. You made the comment that the covered area was just for additional sun area, and I get that part of it. But is there not a current covered deck on the existing house or covered area?
There is.
So the reason for adding an additional one when there's already one there on the primary residence that would lead back to the pool?
I believe they would like to, for cooking space, get it away from the house, entertaining, I believe more or less probably cooking. I think they're going to do
And
it.
to keep what, soups,
Oh, yeah.
everything, because there'll be a bathroom in there, so that people aren't tracking water and everything into the house. They'd have everything outside, near the pool, where the food would be, entertainment.
Okay. So how much would they have to decrease that covered area to put it within the regulations so that there wouldn't be a variance?
5 feet.
5 feet? So if instead of having it 16 feet, you had 11 feet, Then you don't have a variance, you still have a covered area in order to cook,
Well, sorry,
and
it'd
you're
be
wet
only
close.
5 foot deep to meet the 1 foot, or 1,200 square feet. So it'd be to meet within the 1,200 square feet, it'd only be an overhang of 5 feet. Because we
Instead
were,
of
A
16.
little less than 5 feet, so.
Right, so there's an additional 11 feet of covered is what puts it out of variance.
yeah.
Okay.
Because right now, the garage is, as proposed, is 30 by 35. And if you took it 35 by 35, that comes out to 1,225 square feet. So even the 5 feet puts you just
No,
25.
nominally over the maximum amount.
So the hardship of not having that when you've already got it covered is what?
Yeah. Don't know about the hardship, but yeah, just usable space. And yeah, I forgot about the bathroom. People go, dress, and be shaded to get in there. And then the cooking, additional cooking, shaded area.
Well, the gas line and the plumbing all could be, it's gonna be put in there, it can't come from the house. So in order to do the bathroom and the cooktop and all of that, that was gonna be oriented and directed through that area.
Excuse me, ma'am. Could you, if you speak, because we can't pick you up on the mics, if you could come up and identify yourself and use the microphone so everybody can hear both in the room and anyone that's online as well.
Hi, Tiffany Wells. I think you asked about a hardship.
Yes.
So we were planning on doing gas and plumbing for the bathroom and for the grill and all of that. And we looked at it coming from the house, the gas line and any of the plumbing, and the amount of gas that we were needing to come through for the grill, for all of the items for that outdoor kitchen was too much BTUs to come from the house. So we were going to have to run different source. So that's why we ended up coming with the outdoor kitchen over there, under that covered space. And then the cabinets of the countertops for the outdoor kitchen would be so many feet that the 11 feet, the extra, would give us more space to actually sit and use that.
You didn't think you could get that under 5 feet?
No, didn't.
The only question I have right now.
Are there any other questions for the applicant from the board?
And I guess I did have one. So you said that it's pretty much in line with the existing house, so is that correct on the level, on the base?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? Yes, if you'd come up to the microphone and state your name.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tom Winkler. My property is immediately to the north of the wells. And I've jotted down 3 concerns I have. First one, I'm concerned about losing my sight line. I'm just going to read this. I think the project is out of scale with the neighborhood. What would help me is heavy landscaping, which would be trees and shrubs, just to the north of the proposed detached garage. That would help diminish the scale of the project and soften the look. And also bricking the foundation so the detached structure ties in with the house. My concern number 2, I don't want my property value to drop. And I'm not sure if they're temporary or not, but there are 2 electrical boxes coming up out of the ground. And they're only about 5 feet from my property line. It is so close, this proposed garage is so close to my property line. People buy big lots up there because they like the wide open green spaces. Concern number 3 has to do with the topography changes of the project. The land elevation is increased on the Wells lot, and I'm worried about land erosion or water runoff into my yard. The drawing shows a berm straddling the property line instead of all of it being on the Wells side of the property. I do not give permission for a berm on my property or any other changes to my property. Thank you.
Okay. And so, if you don't mind, I have a question for you. So, I know part of the concern was the runoff, and they have stated that the berm would not be on the property, and then they're going to do a swell in through there. With the swell, again, not sure, would have to go back on the distance, but I think you may have a difficult time having both the swell to direct the runoff, plus the landscaping part of it, depending on how much space is truly there. Do you feel that there's enough space for them to put bushes or landscaping to help hide that building from your view and still keep the swell in there?
I'll answer your question this way. The drawing shows roughly 14 and a half feet from the north side of the garage, detached garage, to the north side of the garage to the property line here. I don't see how all this is going to fit in. The berm, I just heard about the berm, but I read my notes as I had them before the meeting. Berm and the swell. Just those two things alone. I don't see all that. I'm not sure about the heavy landscaping I'd like to see. I don't see how all this is going to fit in, but 14 patches.
Okay. So if there was a way to, through landscaping, trees, bushes, those types of things, to kind of help hide that building from your sight line, would you be in favor of that, less opposed to this, or does it not really matter?
Well, as I stated, I would, it would diminish the size of the structure if you had these trees and shrubs just to the north of the detached garage.
Okay.
It would soften the look. And then if you, as I mentioned, if at least the north part of the foundation for the garage were bricked, that would tie it in visually with the house. Those things would all make it look less blunt. And then, so I think when it is screening the shrubs, it would help screen the project. And I would feel a lot better about the proposed project if those things happened and there were no changes, topography changes or any other changes on my side of the property line.
Okay.
So.
All right. I can understand that perfectly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Justin again. Let's see, just to clarify and help, Dustin, you have that last page that you're on, the building elevation. So on this bottom sheet, which it is, plan view is hard to kind of digest, and then what is there now, because we're building it up to get that pad ready. But once the garage is in, this existing grade you see is basically going to be brought back to what was currently there with improvements. So I just kind of wanted to just kind of explain the difference with this, before all that dirt. And they did kind of have a mound there and it went down. But I just want to clarify what you're seeing on the plan versus kind of this elevation here. And this is what he was stating. You see our exposed concrete and the siding. And then on one side we had the brick to kind of match, which we can kind of discuss adding brick to that side, or we were gonna dress that side up probably with some landscaping to kind of help buffer that, which we would have 10 feet to kind of get that, which you could get some pretty good sized shrubs and and bushes within that range and not be too close to either property.
So, question for you. I found your statement of with improvements to be kind of vague. My interpretation of that meaning shrubs, bushes, plants, bricks, is that what you're referring to with improvements, or are you referring to dirt work?
Dirt work improvements, and then, yeah, we can do additional softening of that face as well with, yeah, like I said, maybe brick or shrubs. We can kind of work and see what the owner would prefer, and so a couple improvements on both effects, on both drainage and look.
So the grade's not going to be that severe on that north elevation then?
No, and it's hard when you cut my model where that is, and where I actually cut that versus where it's at. You know, if you think about a 3D, it's cuts a section a couple feet away or here, and so I do need to adjust that a little bit. But it's basically existing grade is what we're going to put it back to, but improve it with the swell.
Okay. So the swell will be there to help keep the runoff from his property. You feel that there's still plenty of room to do some type of landscaping to help, and again, like I said, soften it, kind of prevent it from being the predominant feature from his property. And I guess the question would go back to the owner then too, if your thoughts on that ability to do that, probably here in a second. Address his question on the electrical outlets that are currently setting on the property. Are those temporary for construction?
Those
They're
are
gonna stay there?
temporary, yep.
Okay.
And so when we get this garage, or well, the proposes, yeah, those would be into the garage. So instead of bring them back to the house and so forth, they're temporary and they will be fixed on the house and out of that by the transformer. So.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming that is, do you have the photos, Justin? So, there's one with red tape in it. So is that the area that we're talking about with the electrical setting up?
Yes.
Okay. And so those are just temporary at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay. And now, there appears to be some landscaping along here in this photo. Is there additional landscaping that's currently there along that edge? I mean, there was a tree or something, or,
Oh, there's a lot of landscaping you're seeing in these slides on my property.
Okay.
Can you back up a couple slides? Like, that, to our left at Evergreen, that's on my property.
okay.
We're talking about from the property line. Some of the soil brought in the Wells project.
Excuse me, sir.
Into our yard.
If you would like to speak into the mic, just so everybody can hear, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was saying on the last few slides we've seen, the shrubbery I've seen has all been on my property.
So that shrub, or tree shrub on the left-hand side of that photo, that's on your property?
Correct. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an aerial view that shows some of the trees that we're talking about. So there's, I believe this is probably the evergreen that we see in the photograph, but there are some trees kind of along the property line between the two adjoining neighbors.
Okay. So if you go to the photo with the basketball goal,
Sure.
so those on the right-hand side are on your property?
Yes. There's
Okay.
these 3 yellow shrubs here and that big evergreen that's in my yard.
Gotcha. And the garage will be setting on the raised dirt area, is that correct? Okay. Just make sure I understand exactly where it's setting and what's on each side.
Which the dirt work there is more, it's past where the pad is, just so we can get that pad stabilized.
Right.
You can kind of see the swell a little bit. I mean, there's not much, and then as it kept going, it just, all the water kind of rushed onto his property where that evergreen was. It kind of, but they kind of started to swell, as you see.
Right, because that view, at least to me, looks like everything drains to the west and it drains to the north.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to accomplish with the berm, but after meeting with those dirt guys and the plumber, and obviously not wanting to touch the adjacent property owner, we're going to come up with a better plan.
Okay.
If you can step up to the mic. Yes, please. If you wouldn't mind stating your name and...
Eva Winkler. I just want to point out the topography did change because all that dirt didn't used to be there. So when it rains, I mean, the water just flowed down. But now with all that dirt there, I mean, it's all changed. That's all.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I do have a question for staff. In regards to the water runoff, what type of follow-up does the city of Salina do to make sure that the runoff is adequately dealt with after the construction project is finalized?
Right, and so in the past, when we've had variance cases where there is a requirement that stormwater be captured through a guttering system usually, and then piped or swelled and surface flumed to a specific location. Once the project is complete, it is a requirement that the applicant contact our staff for us to go out and do an inspection and make sure that it has been done correctly. Now, typically what you want to have is you want to have a design that isn't going to change or be modified with new owners. So what I mean by that is you can require that a guttering system and downspout system be constructed, but you want to make sure that there are certain criteria with that it's not just you have a guttering system, you have a downspout system, and then you have a pipe that's run out to the street or a low spot where it gets to a public drainage system. And because if a new owner comes in and that pipe is, well, I don't know why that pipe is sitting there, I don't like it there, it's ugly, gets removed, well then the area could flood unintendedly so without anybody really recognizing it on city staff or, people that in the future that might not know. So what I'm saying is it's perfectly appropriate to have a condition that deals with stormwater runoff, but we want to make sure that that condition has a plan that is able to be carried forward in perpetuity, whether or not the existing owners still live there. So both neighbors eventually will move on at some point, and we want to make sure that the future owners of these two properties, that there aren't any water issues.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I answered that question, but
You did.
But yeah, we've done variance cases where we're having larger storage buildings, which creates more impervious surface area, which creates more additional stormwater runoff, and you have to make sure that you deal with that appropriately. So what that means in this case, along with the landscaping that the neighbor has talked about, one of the options is to postpone action if you're not comfortable with the way things currently are presented in the plans, so that new plans can be drawn up and proposed to you on how the mass is dealt with in terms of either the design or landscaping or both, and how the stormwater runoff is dealt with in terms of a new design that matches what the applicant's representative has described to us, and a curb and gutter system that also would have underground piping to direct the water runoff from the storage building or from the detached garage and covered patio structure down the hill so that it's not impacting any of the neighboring properties, and that the water is appropriately discharged to the river. So that would be an option if that's something that the board is interested in.
Thank you. Does the board have any other questions? If not, does the board want to entertain a motion?
Well, I guess going back to discussion, I think biggest of my, I have less of a concern on the height variance and probably the covered patio area for allowing that variance. I think my bigger concern is just looking at the topography of this and what's going in is how that water is going to be handled going through. When we do plating on the initial developments, that's one of the things that they always look at is how much water is going to be ran off of a property, where it's going. I do agree this is changing the topography significantly, and without knowing exactly how much water that swell is going to hold, how deep it needs to be, how wide it needs to be, I think I have less of ability to approve this variance without getting more information on exactly how wide that swell and how deep it needs to be to keep it off of the north property.
We've moved past that point at this point. I'm sorry.
So I would make a motion to postpone this until we had additional information. I would move that we postpone application V22-7 until we had more information on the water runoff.
Board Member Olson, we would have to have it be a specific date of postponement. So would you like to postpone to the next BZA meeting? It would be July, trying to get there, July 21st.
I would be in favor of the July 21st if we thought that the applicant that would give them sufficient time to provide that information.
Does the applicant feel that that would provide enough time?
Yes.
Okay, then yes, I would move it to whatever date you just said.
All right. And what date was that again? July
21st.
21st. So the motion on the table is to postpone this issue until we have, until the Board of Zoning Appeals or the applicant can present additional information to the Board of Zoning Appeals regarding specific water runoff plans. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to postpone this item to the next meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. There are no administrative items to come before the board.
Hold on, I'm going to bring Justin back real quick.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Justin, we've finished those two items, items 3.1 and 3.2, and we're moving on to administrative items and the rest of our agenda.
There's no administrative items. Is there any unfinished business to come before the board?
We do not have any today to report to you.
Next, we'll move on to public forum. Is there anybody online or in the room that needs to address something before the board?
There is nobody online. The floor would be open to anyone in the room who has any public comments.
Seeing no public comments, is there a motion for adjournment?
I would so move that we adjourn.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
All right, thank you.